You're listening to the Play Therapy Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks, your source for centered and focused play therapy coaching.
Hi, I'm Dr. Brenna Hicks, the Kid Counselor. This is the Play Therapy Podcast where you get a masterclass in child-centered play therapy and practical support and application for your work with children and their families. In today's episode, we are continuing the summer school series where I'm reading from seminal works in the child-centered space. And today I'm reading from The Art of the Relationship Play Therapy by Garry Landreth. By the way, if you don't own that book, you should. I actually have several editions of it. And it is so important for us to really understand this from a sense of this is the way that we are with children. It's a way of being. And that is really, really clearly communicated in The Art of the Relationship. So I highly recommend that you get that book if you don't already have it. And if you have it, make sure that you're reading it. Many of you are like, I have it, but it's never left my shelf. Well, make sure it leaves your shelf and make sure that you start reading it. So we're going to dive into a really, what I consider to be one of the most impactful sections of the entire book today. I love this passage and I'm going to read it for you all. But before I get into that, a couple of housekeeping updates. So back by popular demand, I know you're like, Brenna, you're always changing things, but back by popular demand, I've had so many of you ask for one last hurrah of the 6-figure play therapy coaching, which is the child-centered play therapy skills and training coupled with the private practice and business knowledge. So I know that we switched those and it was the child-centered training specifically, and then the 6-figure training separately. We're now combining them for one final round, and that will begin in October. So I just want to make you aware, if you have been wanting to have the private practice and the business training as well as the child-centered training, you get one last chance. So please go to 6figureplaytherapist.com. and you will be able to find out all the information and details about that. Okay, and then we will also talk at the end of this episode about the conference in October. So hang on tight for that. I'll give you more details there. So let me read from page 50 in Art of the Relationship. And the context of this passage is about how children are different, and children's personalities play a factor in their therapeutic journey. And being mindful of that and considerate of that and respectful of that is crucial to being an effective child-centered play therapist. So I will read passages, I'll share some commentary as we go, and I'm reading, again, page 50 in Art of the Relationship by Landreth. All right, so the headline of this section is called Some Children Are Like Popcorn and Some Are Like Molasses. And I'm sure you can already drum up in your head where this is probably going. So I love this. Oh my gosh. Anyone who has ever been in the presence of children for any extended period of time is well acquainted with the personality and behavioral variability they exhibit as they go about exploring their world in their own individual, unique ways. Okay, so let me pause there. That's essentially saying behaviors vary and personality changes the way children interact. So you have timid kids, you have shy kids, you have quiet kids, you have social kids, you have aggressive kids, you have life of the party kids, just like adults, right? So you put a whole bunch of children in a room together and their behaviors are going to vary and their personality is going to be evident. So that's kind of the premise of the start of this. Some children are like popcorn. They do everything with great bursts of energy and activity. When something occurs to them, they pop forth with exuberance to activate this new and wonderful idea. They're like bumblebees, capable of seemingly motionless hovering when something captures their attention. Then they zoom off with a great burst of motion and buzz of noise to find something else of interest. That's Garry Landreth's gentle Texan way of saying the kids that act like they have ADHD. Okay. Notice that I said act like because you know how I feel about the over diagnostic nature of our culture right now with giving every child the diagnosis of ADHD, even when it's not warranted or necessary. But think about that. There are some kids that are just like popcorn, and they just, with exuberance and with energy and with excitement, they just go and go and go and go, and they keep going to all these different things. That is not inherently a problem. That is not inherently an issue. That is not something that inherently needs to be fixed or corrected. Some kids are like popcorn. Okay, let me continue. Other children are like molasses and can barely be poured from one place to another. They do everything with great deliberateness and careful consideration, caught up in their own seeming inertia, impervious to activity being generated around them. They're like gyroscopes. Everything is functioning and spinning on the inside as it should, but little, if any, movement or change is observable on the outside. Read the really calm, really seemingly indifferent. Don't get excited about much. Don't get invested about much. Don't get engaged about much. But inside, everything is doing what it's supposed to do. They just don't show it on the outside. We have internalizing and externalizing kids, right? So the children that are like molasses that can barely be poured from one place to another, they're deliberate, they're careful, they consider everything, and they don't really notice what's going on around them. You don't see it on the outside, but it doesn't mean that there's not what is normal on the inside. And again, we could easily see this as some innate problem. They need to be more social. They need to be more engaging. They need to talk more. They're too shy. They're too reserved. They don't participate at birthday parties. They don't ever seem to have any friends because they don't talk to anyone. This is not inherently a problem. It's not something that needs to inherently be fixed. These are personality traits of children. Some kids are like popcorn. Some kids are like molasses. And let's go back to the grounding of this entire theory. We unconditionally accept children as they are, where they are, when they are, for who they are. We don't have to expect them to change. We don't want them to be any different than what they are. So the molasses kid is just as accepted as the popcorn kid. The popcorn kid is just as accepted as the molasses kid, depending on your personality. Because as soon as I said that, I thought, oh, that made me sound like I favor one over the other. There are some therapists that would 1,000 times over want a popcorn kid in their playroom. And then there are some therapists that 1,000 times over would want a molasses kid in their playroom. But a true CCPT is going to accept and unconditionally love both. Okay, let me continue. Some children are like mushrooms. They pop forth overnight. Other children are like orchids. They take 7 to 12 years to bloom. Wow, y'all. Think about that. This passage is so incredible to me. Some are going to just instantaneously, they get in there and they just like, they bloom. Boom. Just like that. And then some are like orchids. The process is so long and it takes so much more intentional length of time for it to take place. The effective play therapist is the kind of person who waits for orchids but is patient with mushrooms. Let me read that again. It's actually in bold in the book, by the way. So usually if something is underlined or in bold in a book, it means something and it matters. The effective play therapist is the kind of person who waits for orchids but is patient with mushrooms. That's who we're supposed to be. Whether you're popcorn, you're molasses, you're mushroom, or you're an orchid, it doesn't matter. You're all doing what you need to do in your way, in your time, based on who you are. And we trust that it will work out the way it's supposed to, because that's the child-centered way. Okay, let me continue. Each child has his unique approach to the solution to problems and how life should be lived. Therefore, as the child already possesses those qualities necessary for growing and becoming a well-adjusted, mature individual, the therapist waits patiently for the child to discover that unique self. Let me pause there. The child already possesses the qualities necessary for growing and becoming well-adjusted and mature. We believe that. That's self-actualization. The child has what the child needs. So therefore, the therapist waits patiently for the child to discover it, to become that self, to figure out what that self looks like, to evolve into that self. We wait patiently. Continuing, the therapist has a sincere belief in the child's ability to work out difficulties, and so does not, out of his or her impatience, suggest that the child become involved in other activities or talk about more important topics, which other significant adults have said are important and should be explored because this child needs to change. If that doesn't, in one sentence, wrap up one of the most consistent and most consistently frustrating elements of our job, when we trust the child and trust the process, and an adult in the child's world does not. So let me read that again. The therapist has a sincere belief in the child's ability to work out difficulties, and so does not, out of his or her impatience, suggest that the child become involved in other activities or talk about more important topics, which other significant adults have said are more important and should be explored, quote, because this child needs to change. That's the pressure that we feel all the time. My child told me that you haven't asked him one thing about the divorce. My child said that all they do is play with you and you have not said one thing about their aggression. Can you please bring up the fact that he smacked a kid at school today and that's not okay? And I told him he needs to talk to you about that. Sound familiar? It's a broken record. This is the way that adults in a child's world respond. And I'm not faulting them for it. You don't know what you don't know. They're not child-centered. They don't understand it's a way of being. They don't understand the philosophies and the tenets of this approach. So they can't be expected to understand why we don't. But it's our job to help them understand. That's why the consultations are so important. That's why setting expectations are so important. We have to make sure that they understand as much as they can why we're not going to suggest the child becomes involved in other activities, and why we're not going to talk about more important things. We can't if we honor and believe that the child already possesses what they need to change, and in their time, they will. All right, last sentence. Because the therapist respects the child, he does not interrupt or talk down to the child, nor does the therapist discount what the child says or the feelings he experiences. So there is built-in respect to this process. And, I think about how many teenagers who are much more verbal and much more articulate with whom I work say to me about someone in their life, their mom, their dad, their boyfriend or girlfriend, their best friend. In passing, I can't tell you how many times a teenager has said to me, you know what? If they want my respect, they have to give respect. My teenagers say that all the time. Don't for a second think that kids don't feel that. They don't have the verbal capacity or the cognitive understanding to say something like that, but don't for a second think that they don't understand the reciprocal nature of respect in a relationship. If you want a child to respect you and care about you and love you and accept you and do all of the things, you extend that to the child first. It's unconditional love, unconditional acceptance. Therefore, we don't interrupt, we don't talk down, we don't discount what the child says or the feelings that he experiences. Why? Because they're valid and they matter. This is the nature of the child-centered play therapist. Because some children are popcorn, some are molasses, some are mushrooms, some are orchids. And even with parent pressure, and even with outside expectation, there's mutual respect built into what we do. We respect where they are, who they are, how they are, why they are, when they are. That is what being CCPT means. And this is not as much a skill set as it is a way of being, right? Okay. Hope that resonated with you as much as it does with me. I love that passage in the book. All right, final thoughts. As I mentioned in a recent episode, I am in fact going to be at the conference, and we are planning a meetup on Friday. That Friday of the conference, we will have an all things CCPT. So if you are a podcast listener, if you are a collective member, if you are a coaching participant, or if you just like CCPT, I would love to have you. So please make sure you are signed up for my email newsletter. That is how I will be communicating updates and details about that meetup. And of course, I will also mention it on the podcast in future episodes. But just be mindful that I'm going to be giving updates as we solidify details and I can make them available to you. So make sure you sign up for my newsletter if you haven't already, playtherapypodcast.com. And as always, y'all make me so happy. You bring me so much joy. I wanted to share a really quick little thing. I got an email, and the email said, I listened to your Field of Dreams episode, and it was perfect timing because I was setting up my playroom, and it made me think about how if you build it, they will come in the movie. By the way, related aside, if you've not seen Field of Dreams, please go rent it from your library. And I guess you don't rent it anymore, do you? That's the Blockbuster days, y'all. I'm talking about my age here. You can't go rent movies anymore. Do you know how sad that is? I used to love going to Blockbuster. Anyway, please check out the movie from your library and watch Field of Dreams. It is just the most wonderful baseball movie. But she emailed me and said, I was listening to your episode, and if you build it, they will come. And I'm setting up my playroom, and I'm just thinking, wow, like I'm building this playroom and kids will come. And she sent me a picture of her like newly established playroom, and she's an Iranian play therapist. And I just had this moment where I was like, there are playrooms all over the world. And I'm getting emotional, but there are playrooms springing up all over the world from people that love kids and love child-centeredness. And every single playroom that is created, every single playroom that is set up, every person that puts carefully selected toys in a room and opens the door and lets kids come in, amazing things happen. And this is the gift that we have. We get to do this for a living. And kids are better for it, and families are better for it. And families in Iran, I mean, think about the cultural implications of that. Kids in Iran, in a war-torn part of the world, are given the environment and the relationship where they can flourish and they can thrive and they can heal and develop lifelong skills. I was so encouraged by that email. I was so happy to see that picture. And I hope that doesn't get lost. I hope that we stay focused on the why behind what we do. Our playroom is this special place that kids come, and it's like nowhere else in their world. And every time we have time with a child in the playroom, that is lifelong significance in that child's life. And I was just so encouraged by that, and I'm so grateful to have received that. And I know you all do your work and you listen and you're in the collective or you coach with me or you're a podcast listener. And I know you don't have the benefit of people emailing you from all around the world. I wish you did. It is the most fulfilling, incredible, humbling thing of my whole life. But I want you to know this is worldwide and it is so meaningful. I hope you understand that in little pockets, literally all over the world, I get emails from every pocket of the world of someone finding play therapy, finding child-centered, and going all in and saying, I want to create a playroom and have kids come play with me. And I want to see what happens in the child-centered model. And I want to see how kids work through their stuff. And then it happens and the whole world is better for it. So I love y'all. I hope that you do not discount or undermine in any way the significance of every moment spent in a playroom with a kid. It's so powerful, it's so meaningful, and it's so significant. And that's just something that I think we celebrate every day of our lives, that this is what we do for a living. Love y'all. We'll talk again soon. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Play Therapy Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks. For more episodes and resources, please go to www.playtherapypodcast.com.